His guitar hung low, and he ambled to the microphone, tugging on his pants. His eyes were half closed, but the crowd didn't care. Scotty walked behind him, pretending to wind him up like a toy. Elvis's legs started to shake, and he launched into "That's All Right, Mama." The room exploded. People were on their feet, screaming, clapping, and whistling. Elvis's voice was raw and powerful, his moves hypnotic. Scotty and Bill were in sync, their instruments blending perfectly. After 5 back-to-back numbers, Elvis finally spoke to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we weren't really supposed to be here tonight. We were booked into the MB Corral in Wichita Falls. We didn't know about this booking until we got a phone call earlier and found out about the mix-up. We weren't gonna come, but we heard all of you were waiting for us, so we talked the Miller brothers into letting us run over here for a little while. We were in such a hurry, we ran out of gas about 12 miles out of town and had to hitch a ride in. Hectic, man. Anyway, we made it, and we appreciate you waiting for us." The band played for 40 minutes, and the crowd was electrified. When Elvis finished, fans rushed the stage, seeking autographs and kisses. One girl leaped into his arms. "Do you remember me?" she asked. "Yes, I met you in Stamford," Elvis replied, his charm undeniable. Scotty and Bill packed up the equipment, and the 3 of them sped back to Wichita Falls, some of the teenagers trailing them to catch the show for the second time that night. When they arrived at the MB Corral, the place was nearly empty. Billy Thompson and the Miller brothers had done their best to entertain the crowd, but many had already left, muttering darkly under their breath. Elvis never accepted another booking from RCA Records again, partly because he didn't trust them. Despite his efforts, he managed to satisfy neither the crowd in Seymour nor the one in Wichita Falls. Gene Wagner, one of the owners of the MB Corral, was furious. But for the people who had waited in Seymour, Elvis's surprise appearance was unforgettable. The next day, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill were on the road again, driving to Big Spring. They were tired, but the adrenaline from the night before kept them going. They found a motel and crashed for a few hours, only to wake up and head to the town's record shop. The shop's eccentric owner, Oscar Glickman, was behind the register. Elvis introduced himself and tried to strike a deal, offering to sell Glickman a box of records from the back of their car. Glickman hesitated, but Elvis's charm won him over. He agreed to buy a box, though he put most of the records in the basement. Elvis and the boys then headed to the White Elephant Cafe in Eastland for lunch. They were scanning the room for potential dates when Billy Garrett, the daughter of a Texas oil man, walked in. She joined them and they caught up over lunch. Afterward, they decided to catch a cowboy movie before the show. The film was so bad that Elvis started improvising dialogues, making Scotty and Bill laugh uncontrollably. Billy tried to shush them, but they were having too much fun. That night they played in Cisco, where only a handful of people showed up. Billy and her family nearly doubled the audience. Despite the small crowd, Elvis gave it his all, even responding to some hecklers by pointing his butt at them mid-song. Billy stayed after the show and introduced her uncle and aunt to the boys. She promised to catch up with them again, and she did, at the Coker Radio concert in Kilgore. In Midland, the crowd was a bit larger, and Billy snapped a picture of Elvis hanging out in the gym before the show. Later, she brought her father to see Elvis perform at the Rio Palm Isle in Longview. The concert wasn't as well attended as they had hoped, but Mr. Garrett and Elvis hit it off. Elvis even signed Mr. Garrett's shirt cuff, much to Billy's surprise. After that, the boys headed to Gladewater, where they were booked to play a show at the high school gym. They arrived exhausted, and Elvis parked his pink car behind the Blue Grill Cafe. The owner, Mrs. Landers, was intrigued by their appearance and led them to a table. Elvis, Scotty, and Bill were famished and tired, but they were still full of energy. They chatted with the cook, Clarence Cobb, for over an hour, discussing music and life on the road. The show that night was part of the Louisiana Hayride, which had moved from Shreveport to Gladewater due to a carnival. The crowd was massive, and when Horace Logan, the master of ceremonies, announced that Slim Whitman was sick, the audience was disappointed, but Logan had a surprise. "We've got this new kid that's going to sing for you, named Elvis Presley," he said. The crowd didn't know what to expect, but they were about to witness something magical. Elvis took the stage and the night was his. His clothes were bold, his moves were electrifying, and his music was wild and unforgettable. The crowd was electrified, and Elvis's star was rising. Elvis's life was a whirlwind of excitement and trouble. One night, he set the stage on fire, almost burning down the high school and sending the young women in the audience into a frenzy. Backstage, the girls swarmed around him, their friendly hugs turning into something more. But the local police weren't amused. They warned Elvis that if he didn't stop the touching, he'd be in big trouble. Elvis took the warning seriously and stayed out of trouble that night. On April 30th, Elvis and over 40 other performers were set to play at the Louisiana Hayride in Gladewater. The ticket sales were going crazy, and everyone was excited to see Elvis, who was known as the Bopping Hillbilly. His two-piece band, Scotty and Bill, had a unique sound that was becoming really popular. Elvis had some hit songs like That's All Right, Blue Moon of Kentucky, and You're a Heartbreaker. In Dallas on May 28th, Elvis was playing at the Big D Jamboree. He arrived at big state distributors to promote his records, signing autographs and checking on sales. The guys there were happy, because Elvis's records were selling like hotcakes. But things changed when Sam Phillips of Sun Records sold Elvis's contract to RCA. Big State lost their star, and it was a big shock. Carolyn Bradshaw, a young singer on the Louisiana Hayride, started dating Elvis in 1955. They had a lot in common, and spent a lot of time together. But as Elvis's fame grew, he was on the road more, and Carolyn noticed he was seeing other girls. It was a tough realization, and she eventually broke up with him. In May, Elvis played a concert in Odessa, but the crowd was tiny. Most people were at another concert where Elvis was performing. When Carolyn and Johnny Horton tried to see Elvis, they found him surrounded by hundreds of girls. Elvis had to escape through a window and get into a car to get away. The road was getting tough. In Jacksonville, Florida, 14,000 fans nearly trampled Elvis, and then they broke into his dressing room and stole his clothes. In Kilgore, Texas, only a few people showed up. Elvis was frustrated, and his bandmates Scotty and Bill were fighting. Things were tense. On June 3rd, Elvis played 2 shows in Lubbock, Texas. The first was a free show at a Pontiac dealership, and the second was at the Fair Park Coliseum. A young Buddy Holly, who was just starting out, was there watching Elvis perform. Buddy was inspired by Elvis, and it changed his life. On June 16th, Elvis was supposed to play in Texarkana, but he was nowhere to be found. The crowd was chanting his name, and his bandmates were worried. It turned out that Elvis's pink Cadillac had caught on fire on the way to the show. He managed to save his guitar, but lost everything else. He hitched a ride to the auditorium, looking exhausted and in his regular clothes. When he finally made it to the stage, the crowd went wild, and he played his heart out, even though he was devastated about his car. Elvis's life was a mix of incredible highs and lows, but no matter what, he always found a way to keep going. The boys gathered themselves, determined to give the audience the show they came to see. Elvis didn't seem to have his usual energy, but his sidekicks, Scotty and Bill, didn't blame him. They finished the show, signed pictures, and shared his pain. Then they took him back to the hotel and tried to figure out how they would manage the back-to-back tour ahead. A year later, Elvis would have enough money to buy any car he wanted, but he would lose something far more valuable, his close friendship with Scotty and Bill. It was a bittersweet thought, but for now they had to focus on the present. On June 17th, Elvis and the Blue Moon Boys were supposed to play at the Stamford Roundup Hall, a place where you could bring a bottle of booze but had to drink it in your car. Without transportation, it seemed impossible to make it to the concerts booked for the next few days. So after the show in Texarkana, Scotty drove back to Tennessee to borrow the pink and purple crown Victoria Elvis had bought his parents. Texas had no speed limits back then, and Scotty must have driven at 100 mph, arriving just in time for the concert. Scotty was exhausted, and Elvis was still feeling down, so the show that night was a bit lackluster. The same crowd that had nearly climbed the walls 3 months earlier now gave a polite but reserved response. The next morning, the mayor from the nearby town said, "That boy will never make it." But 6 months later, the teasing began. "Hey, Mayor Byer, did you see Presley on Ed Sullivan last night?" It lasted for years. Elvis never showed up for the third booking in Stamford that autumn. Bob Neal, Elvis's manager, canceled the concert and paid the owner of the Roundup Hall. The bigger gigs meant Elvis could no longer afford to play small towns. On June 20th and 21, Elvis and the Blue Moon Boys played in Beaumont at the Municipal Auditorium. It was a benefit concert for the Beaumont Police Department, and the Big D Jamboree was there, along with the Louisiana Hayride and the Grand Ole Opry. The hall was packed for all 5 shows, and they made a lot of money for the police. Elvis performed alongside Sonny James, Charlene Arthur, and Marty Robbins. Charlene had her own TV show, and she had brought Elvis on it earlier, where he appeared young and nervous. It was a far cry from the movie star he would become a year later. On July 4th, Elvis and the Boys played in Stephenville and De Leon. The concerts were part of a gospel event in a pecan orchard, and the Blackwood Brothers were the headliners. Elvis was supposed to rock the crowd, but he saw the Blackwood Brothers perform a moving tribute to their fallen members, and felt it would be inappropriate to play his usual set. Instead, he sang old-time gospel songs, which disappointed the teenagers who came to hear his rockabilly. The adults who came to hear the quartets were unimpressed by Elvis's performance. After the show, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill quickly left for their next gig in Brownwood that evening. In August, Chuck Berry released his first hit, Maybelline, and the music world was about to change. On August 10th, Elvis played in Gladewater at the baseball field. The heat was intense, and only about 20 people showed up. Elvis was disappointed and gave a lackluster performance. But Scotty gave him a pep talk, and Elvis came back for the second half with renewed energy. The small crowd was stunned by his enthusiasm. The next day in Longview at the Rio Palm Isle, Elvis caused a bit of a stir. He was flirting with the audience, and one woman's husband found her in the car with Elvis. The husband gave Elvis a good beating, but Elvis managed to escape and get back to the club to finish his show. On August 22nd, Elvis played in Wichita Falls at Sputter Baseball Field. DJ Bill Mack had booked the show, and Elvis drove his pink Cadillac right up to the stage. He performed with such intensity that the flatbed stage rocked violently. Mac's mother, who was in town for the birth of his daughter, couldn't stop saying how vulgar it was. After the show, Elvis went with Mac to the hospital to see the new baby, but when they returned, Elvis's car was dead because he had left the lights on. Despite the challenges, Elvis's career was starting to take off, and he was about to become a household name. Elvis and his band, the Blue Moon Boys, were on a non-stop tour, playing in small towns across Texas and beyond. One sweltering Friday night in August, Weldine and her friend read about Elvis playing at the local baseball field in Gonzales. They debated going to the drive-in instead, but changed their minds when a new girl from Corpus Christi told them how amazing Elvis was. They decided to check him out. The girls arrived at the baseball field as the sun set, and the temperature dropped to a still sweltering 95 degrees. Elvis drove up in his pink Cadillac, jumped on stage, and performed a few songs before speeding off. The girls, intrigued, followed the car to where it parked. They saw a girl in tight pedal pushers and a peekaboo blouse getting into the car. Curious, they tried to peek inside, but were shocked by what they saw. They decided to head to the drive-in instead, feeling a bit scandalized. In September, tragedy struck as James Dean died in a car crash, just a day after finishing his film Giant. Meanwhile, Elvis and his band had their own near miss. They were late for a show in Texarkana, and Scotty drove the Cadillac at breakneck speeds through Arkansas. They crashed into a farm truck, but miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. The state trooper who arrived to the scene took his time, much to Elvis's frustration. They finally made it to the show, where Elvis thanked the audience and played a solid set, despite his thin and drawn appearance. The next night, Elvis played at the Big D Jamboree in Dallas. Unbeknownst to him, his manager, Colonel Parker, was already negotiating to move him to bigger venues. This would be Elvis's last show at the Jamboree. After the performance, Elvis and the band went to the Roundup Club, marking the end of an era. In October, Elvis played at the Boys Club Gym Auditorium in Paris. The place was packed, and the heat was intense. Elvis sweated profusely, but gave an electrifying performance. After the show, he signed autographs and even drove some fans around in his pink Cadillac. Later, he and Bill headed to a local beer joint, where Elvis, despite not drinking, enjoyed the atmosphere. The next day, Elvis played in Greenville, where the auditorium was built over the city jail. The inmates could hear the concert from their cells, and one of them even carved Elvis's name into the wall. The following day, in San Marcos, the band's tensions were palpable. They argued before, during, and after the show. Elvis, feeling the strain, impulsively bought flowers for his mother, leaving Scotty and Bill to hitch a ride to the next gig in Austin. The band's promoter, Tillman Franks, convinced Elvis to take a break and join him on a bus trip to Houston. On the bus, Tillman tried to impress a volleyball team by revealing Elvis's presence, but the girls were skeptical. Despite the challenges, Elvis's star continued to rise, but the grueling tour was taking its toll on him and his band. The road ahead was full of uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Elvis Presley was on the brink of something massive. Tillman Franks couldn't resist the temptation. "Really, that's him sleeping right there," he insisted, pointing to Elvis Presley, who was dozing off in the corner of the bus. A girl nearby overheard and chimed in, "If that's him, make him sing something." Tillman shook Elvis awake and told him to belt out a song. Grudgingly, Elvis opened his mouth and a few notes spilled out. The entire bus erupted in screams. Everyone flung their bodies over the seats, begging for more. Elvis sang an impromptu a cappella program, but he threw dirty looks at the laughing Tillman for the rest of the trip to Houston. By the time they reached Houston, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill were ready to shake off the tension and get back to their music. They had a grueling 10-concert tour across Texas ahead of them, and they needed to be on their best behavior. The next stop was Cherry Springs, a little town nestled in the hill country between Fredericksburg and Mason. The dance hall booked for the concert was too small for the massive crowd that showed up. Kids hung out of windows and stood outside, screaming and shaking the rafters. The girls were so excited that their boyfriends became jealous. One kid even carved his initials into Elvis's shiny pink Cadillac, with a pocket knife to show how he felt about his girlfriend's enthusiasm. Elvis found the little present when he went outside to sign autographs. The show that night was packed with talent, including Jimmy and Johnny, whose absence from the Hayride had given Elvis his big break, Johnny Horton, Betty Amos, and Horace Logan as the MC. Billy Birdbrain, also known as Tillman Franks, was there too, doubling as a comedian. After the Houston show, the group hit the road again. They drove 266 miles to Cherry Springs, then 95 miles to Brownwood, and kept moving through Texas, playing in Abilene, Midland, Amarillo, Odessa, and Lubbock. Each stop was a whirlwind of excitement, with fans chasing Elvis wherever he went. On October 11, 1955, Elvis and the band played at the Fair Park Auditorium in Abilene. Elsie Medlin and her friends, Jane Giles and Valerie Harms, were determined to see Elvis again. They had already met him at a show in Stamford, where they had started a fan club. The girls drove to Abilene, joining a crowd of excited fans at the stage door. When Elvis saw them, he pointed and said, "Let these three backstage." They didn't need a second invitation, and rushed to the back. Backstage, Elvis lined the girls up and kissed them one by one. It was Elsie's first kiss. He borrowed her lipstick and autographed a picture for her in passion pink. When Johnny Cash walked by, Elvis whispered to the girls to stay away from him because he was on drugs. They were wide-eyed but obedient. The show that night was chaotic. As soon as Elvis hit the stage, the crowd went wild. They chanted, danced, and screamed. During a rowdy performance of "I've Got a Woman," Elvis ripped off his bow tie and threw it into the crowd. When they started climbing the stage, he lobbed a shoe to stop them. It hit an old lady on the head, but she was fine and refused to give the shoe back. Elvis finished the set in one stocking foot, but he stopped throwing his clothes at the crowd after that. The fans grew bolder. Some unbuttoned their blouses and asked Elvis to sign their bras and breasts. They wore peekaboo blouses for days to show off the autographs. Some even taped paper over the signatures to keep them from washing off. Elsie and Jane visited Elvis at his Lubbock performance, and again at the Hank Snow Jamboree in Wichita Falls. Despite the ice covering the state, Elsie's dad let her and Jane go to the show. When they arrived, Elvis was late, and Hank Snow was furious. But Elsie and Jane made it backstage, where they waited for Elvis to arrive. He showed up over an hour late, but was safe. By the autumn of 1956, Elvis had become a national sensation. When Elsie and Jane drove to Dallas to see him at the Cotton Bowl, the show was a different experience. With gaggles of guards and thousands of fans, Elvis no longer hung around to mingle. But the girls found out he was staying at the Stoneleigh Hotel. They tried to act nonchalant, but were determined to see him. A man in the lobby, Nick Adams, a famous actor, offered to take them to Elvis's room. When they arrived, Elvis was surprised but happy to see them. They spent the evening catching up, and it felt like old times. Elsie and Jane kept in touch with Elvis through letters and telegrams. When he appeared on the Dorsey Show in New York, they sent a heartfelt telegram. "Hurry home, stop. Leave those damn Yankees alone. Stop, we love you." The last time Elsie and Jane saw Elvis, he had just been drafted. They visited his parents' house in Colleen, and he invited them in. He talked about the Army and how his mother wasn't feeling well. 3 weeks later, his mother passed away, and the girls never saw him again. In Gladewater, the Louisiana Hayride was back, and the town was buzzing with excitement. Elvis had just finished a successful concert in Cleveland, and was now ranked as the #1 most promising country and western artist by Billboard. He was about to sign a new 3-year contract with RCA, and Heartbreak Hotel was ready for his first RCA recording session. The Hayride show in Gladewater was a live broadcast, and the entire town was ready to celebrate Elvis's rising stardom. The excitement for the show in Gladewater was electric. People from all over the Southwest poured into the small town, jamming the local gym. The JCs, the town's civic leaders, raked in over $1,500 from the show, which they used to fund various community projects like the Little League baseball program. The crowd was so big, they had to print special souvenir programs with a large picture of Elvis Presley, who was a huge draw for the Hayride show. Elvis, however, was feeling the pressure. He found solace at his favorite spot, Case Sidge radio station in Gladewater. Tom Perriman, the station manager, made sure no one disturbed him. Elvis would practice in the sound studio, wander the halls, and even hide in the offices. He'd sit on the floor, read comic books, and laugh silently when the secretary, Shirley Graham, told callers he wasn't there. One night, during a Hayride show, Elvis's manager asked Shirley to guard his dressing room to prevent fans from stealing his clothes. She was shocked, but eventually agreed. She stood there, protecting Elvis's clothes, while he performed on stage. The night of the Gladewater show, the gym was packed. Beer tubs backstage kept the singer's spirits high, and even the MC, Horace Logan, got a little tipsy. When Elvis was announced, the crowd's roar was so loud, it seemed to shake the building. He stumbled on the stairs, but the audience was sympathetic. One parent, though, yelled, "The devil's child is drunk and can't stand on his own 2 feet." The show went on without any more incidents. A few days later, Elvis turned 21 and went to RCA Recording Studio. It was a far cry from the relaxed environment of Sun Studios. The RCA people were strict, but after some adjustments, Elvis and his band recorded several songs, including Heartbreak Hotel. They were exhausted by the end of the session. Elvis then joined Hank Snow's tour. Hank didn't like Elvis much and put him at the bottom of the bill. But Elvis's popularity was growing, and people came to see him, not Hank. One night in Wichita Falls, the audience booed Hank and his band, and some even threw pennies at them. Elvis arrived just as Hank was about to quit. The crowd's reaction was intense, and Elvis's performance was a hit. In April, Elvis returned to Wichita Falls for his own show. The auditorium was packed with fans of all ages. Elvis worked the crowd, and they went wild. After the show, he accidentally slapped a lady on the back, not realizing it was Bill Mack's wife. He felt bad, but everyone was in good spirits. Jay Thompson, a local DJ, got a special backstage pass to interview Elvis. The interview was a hit, and people loved hearing Elvis talk. He shared that he was 21 and used to drive a truck in Memphis before he became a singer. He was learning to be an electrician, but decided to stick with music. The interview was just one of many moments that showed how much Elvis had grown. He was no longer just a local star. He was a sensation, and everyone wanted to hear him sing. Elvis's rise to fame was nothing short of a whirlwind. After his first record with Sun Records, That's All Right Mama, he was a name everyone was talking about. His unique style, a mix of rock and roll, country, and a dash of gospel, had people hooked. He didn't just sing, he moved, he grooved, and he brought the house down every time he stepped on stage. One of his first big breaks came when he joined the Louisiana Hayride. It wasn't an easy start. He went down there to try out, and the first time it was a bit of a gamble. But the second time, the crowd started to really get into his music. They loved his songs, and before he knew it, he had a job there. He became a regular and the fan base grew, but even then he knew it was time to move on. His last night at the Hayride was a bittersweet moment, but he was ready for the next big thing. Scotty and Bill, his bandmates, were a crucial part of his journey. They met when they made their first record, and from that moment they were a team. Together they toured the country, playing different places every night. It was a grueling schedule, but the excitement of the fans kept them going. Elvis's energy was infectious, and the crowd's reaction was electric. They'd scream, they'd cry, and they'd do anything to get a glimpse of him. In 1956, Elvis's career took another big leap. He signed a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures and was set to star in a movie called The Rainmaker, alongside Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn. But his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had other plans. He told Elvis to skip The Rainmaker for a better role. Instead, Elvis was loaned to MGM for the Reno Brothers. This decision was just one of many that would shape Elvis's future. During this time, Elvis was everywhere. He appeared on TV shows like The Milton Berle Show and The Ed Sullivan Show, and his records were climbing the charts. I Forgot to Remember to Forget and Heartbreak Hotel were huge hits, and RCA Records was thrilled with their new star, but the road wasn't easy. Elvis collapsed from exhaustion in Florida, but quickly bounced back, determined to keep going. On April 10, 1956, Elvis returned to Lubbock, Texas, for a performance at the Fair Park Coliseum. The city was buzzing with excitement. The Coliseum, which usually seated 5,500, was packed to the brim with fans. People were standing in the aisles and the back of the auditorium, and the energy was electric. Elvis's performance was a mix of singing and moving, and the fans went wild. They screamed, they swooned, and they tried to get as close to him as possible. Twice, the police had to stop mobs of teenagers from breaking through the doors behind the stage. The next few days were no different. In Amarillo, Elvis's car started having problems, so he had to take it to the dealership. After a quick fix, he was back on the road, heading to the Municipal Auditorium. The audience there was just as enthusiastic, and the show was a success, but it wasn't without its chaos. High school students from nearby White Deer High School arrived on 3 busloads, each clutching a sack lunch and a signed permission slip. By the end of the night, many of the girls were red-eyed and hoarse from screaming, and some had lost their shoes in the frenzy. The chaperone was left to wonder how she would explain this to the principal. Finally, on April 15th, Elvis arrived in San Antonio. The Municipal Auditorium was packed, and the promoters had booked 2 shows, expecting to fill half the seats each time. They sold out both shows, and the crowd was beyond excited. During the afternoon show, the police struggled to keep the teens from storming the stage. When Elvis finished his set, the crowd was left stunned, unsure if it was really over. In a moment of mass telepathy, they rushed around the building to the stage door, hoping to catch a glimpse of their idol one last time. Elvis's journey was just beginning, and the world was watching. His music, his style, and his energy were changing the face of entertainment, and he was just getting started. The crowd outside the Heart O' Texas Coliseum in Waco was wild, with nearly 4,000 teenagers screaming and squealing, waiting for their idol. Inside a darkened Cadillac, Elvis Presley, the 21-year-old king of rock and roll, was getting ready to face them. He felt a mix of excitement and fear, like he was on the edge of something big, something that could either make or break him. Elvis was different. He wasn't just another hillbilly singer. He had a style that was all his own, a blend of gospel, country, and rhythm and blues. When he stepped on stage, he wasn't just performing. He was connecting with his audience in a way that was raw and real. His music, his dance moves, and his charismatic presence made him a phenomenon. Before the show, Elvis sat in the car, talking to a reporter. He was honest about his fears and dreams. "I don't know what it is that makes the girls go crazy over me," he said. "I guess it's just something God gave me. I'm grateful, but I'm scared. Scared it might all end as quickly as it started." Elvis's fame was growing fast. He had already recorded hits like Heartbreak Hotel and Blue Suede Shoes, and he was about to start his first movie. But he was still the same boy from Memphis, Tennessee, who used to sing in the choir. He was humble and down to earth, even though he was now a star. When asked about his sideburns, he laughed. "I don't know if I'll keep them for my movie. It depends on the part, but I'm supposed to play Billy the Kid soon. It'll be different, you'll see." Elvis had big dreams. He wanted to be more than just a singer. He wanted to be an actor. But he knew his fans loved him for his music. "I'll never stop singing, honey. Never," he promised. He also shared his fears, like the nightmares he had. "I dream I'm about to fight someone or be in a car wreck. It's scary, but it's part of who I am." Despite his fears, Elvis was ready to face the crowd. He stepped out of the car and onto the stage, and the moment he did, the auditorium erupted. The girls screamed, the boys cheered, and Elvis played his heart out. He sang, he danced, and he connected with every single person in the room. For Elvis, it was more than just a show. It was a way to express himself, to share his passion, and to make people feel something. He knew that his music was powerful, and he was grateful for every moment of it. As the night went on, the energy never waned. Elvis performed with the same intensity and enthusiasm as he had when he was just starting out. He was a star, but he was still the same kid who loved music and wanted to share it with the world. The show ended and the crowd was left breathless. Elvis had done it again. He had brought them all together, if only for a few hours, and made them feel something they couldn't explain. It was a night they would never forget, and for Elvis, it was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever.